This question is checking to see if you understand about different ways that a programmer can test their code to get rid of any errors that come up. You have to be able to explain about unit testing, but also one alternative to unit testing, or one thing to use as well as unit testing. 6 marks up for grabs, but there's 3 mark bands here. 1 or 2 marks if you don't really know what you're talking about, or if you don't phrase it particularly well. 3 or 4 marks if you've got some sort of idea, and if your English is okay. But for 5 or 6 marks, not only have you got to use the right keywords to show that you know what you're talking about, but you have to phrase it clearly so that your answer makes sense. This is a paragraph of text, not bullet points. So let's have a look at unit testing. So unit testing is where a programmer will write some code, and then they'll write another piece of code that will test that code. So a program would write a unit test to test a small section of a file that they've written. So it might be just one function or one procedure that they test. So the reason that they do unit tests is they can automate it. Let's say you're making a library to display 3D blocks in a sort of Minecraft game, and you're writing the code to display just one block in code. So you'd write the code to display the graphics properly, and you might write a unit test to display a block at coordinates 0, 0, 0, and then you might change it so it automatically tests that to plot a block at any coordinate. So it might test it 1,000 times just at the press of one button. So unit tests are great for automatically testing just one small section of a file, one procedure or one function or one class or one small section of a code. So it's done as you write the code. So as soon as you add some more features to it, you you run the test to see if you've broken it, and you can detect logical errors and runtime errors, but most of the time you detect syntax errors, so things that cause your code to crash straight away and stop it from running. Modular tests are the same as unit tests, but they're often written by somebody else rather than the programmer. So in this question, we're just talking about unit tests, and they're often written at the same time or often before you write the small section of code. Integration testing happens a little bit later, so you've made your function, you've made your procedure, you've written a whole file, but then you link that into the rest of your project and test to see if it works with the rest of the project. So you might have, say in our Minecraft example, you might have the bit where the Minecraft character moves, and when the character builds a block, does the block display in the right sort of place? So you're checking to see if the code that you've just written links together with another file or another function. So you do this after you've written a small section of code, but as you link it in to another small section of code. It might be you're designing a user interface, you're designing some code so that people can type in, say, a username and password. That's the small section of code that you're writing. And then when you integrate it, you might want to put it into the rest of the website and see if there's any errors when you put it onto a live website. So integration testing, you're testing it with other parts of the code. You might find some syntax errors, you might find some logical errors, but often you'll come across some runtime errors because you're putting it into a more real-world situation, so more unexpected things can happen. Then you've got system testing, and this is when the whole thing isn't necessarily finished, but it's ready to test. You've got the whole game complete. You can employ a tester, or the program can sit down and play the whole game. So it's harder to detect the individual syntax errors or runtime errors. You can still come across them, but you're not necessarily interested about the individual small aspects of the code. You just want to see if the whole thing does what it's expected. So you're more interested in the logic. Does it do what it's supposed to do? So these are the 3 main types of testing. Remember, unit testing on one small section of code, integration when you link it together with another file. So you might link 2 functions together, see if they work together, or system testing when you test the whole project. There are different types of testing. You might also want to talk about, and you get marks for talking about alpha testing. So that's when you've got an early version of your project that you can test to see if it works. It might not have all of the functionality, it might not look pretty, but you just want to test to see if it does what it's supposed to. Compatibility testing would be where you're testing to see if your code will work on different devices. Does it work on Windows and Linux and on a Mac? If you're designing an app, does that work on an iPad? Does it work on Android? Or does it work on an iPhone or just an iPad mini or a normal larger iPad? You're testing compatibility across multiple devices. Benchmark performance testing means you're not only testing to see if it works, you're testing to see how quickly it works or how much memory it uses. So, are you making your code efficient? And you're judging how efficient it is. You're quantifying how quickly it runs or how much memory it uses or how much space it takes up on disk. Black box functional testing and white box testing. I'm sure if you Google this, you'll get a better answer than if I explain it. But black box is where you don't care what the code does inside, you don't care what functions and procedures it uses, you're just testing to see if it does the job that it's supposed to do. Whereas white box testing, you are interested in what's inside. You care about the way that the code is structured, you care about the data structures used, you care about the functions and procedures, you're interested in the whole thing inside. So you could compare any of these, but remember you only have to be aware of unit testing and one other. So I would recommend that you learn about unit testing, which is when a programmer writes a small piece of code and writes a test to automatically test it, and probably just one other, such as integration testing, when you're linking your small piece of code with another part of the project.